Trump Derangement Syndrome is real, folks. And what happened over the weekend is a clear example of how someone can take things very far. Now, I'm not here to comment on the shooter and all the motives because that's still being understood. But the reaction that I see from some academics, like the professor at UBC who said, an inch away, so close, lets me know that Trump derangement syndrome exists. Many of us probably know this with family and friends and people in high ranking positions that we know absolutely detest and hate Donald Trump, Republicans, conservatives, etc. And let me just make it clear that it's not just hatred towards the right. There's a lot of hatred towards the left as well, which I'll get into in a minute. But Trump derangement syndrome is real. And I think this is all because our politics have become neutered, watered down. It's basically everyone agreeing on a host of topics, which I don't necessarily believe the general public does. I don't think the general public agrees on abortion, capital punishment, rights for the LGBTQ community. I think many of these issues people have varying levels of support or disagreement on. And politicians, though, have over many years and decades made the presumption that their constituents don't disagree, and instead say that we're not opening up these topics. How many times in Canada have we seen that happen? Stephen Harper openly said he's not opening the abortion debate, and the same thing is true with Pierre Poilievre. He's openly said he's not opening up the abortion debate. But the challenge with that, in saying that in campaign mode, is the presumption that everyone is progressive on these issues, and everyone isn't. So when Donald Trump, during his campaign in 2016, says, I'm not, openly talking about illegal immigration, openly talking about abortion, openly talking about a lot of social issues, it reveals to society the fissures, the cracks that have always existed. We've just not paid attention to. And I think what the Democrats did in that response was, once those fissures were opened, they said, well, that's just a basket of deplorables that see the world through those lights. But in reality, if you were to take 1,000 Americans, 1,000 Canadians from every walk of life, if you were to say, listen, I really want your opinion, and if they truly knew their opinion wasn't going to be recorded or it was completely anonymous, I guarantee you would be very surprised at what people think, like truly think, when it comes to abortion, immigration, capital punishment, LGBTQ rights, etc. So Trump, understanding the psyche of people, spoke to that. Now, we can all kind of surmise that that's the lowest common denominator, that those are opinions we shouldn't have. But the reality is that the opinions may be couched in, racism, xenophobia, etc. It may be that umbrella, but really the opinion is pointing to a real concern in our society that progressive politics does not address. So if we say things like diversity is our strength, and we talk about immigration, etc., well, what happens when in the span of a few years, a community that was a diverse mix of people suddenly becomes dominated by one culture, one ethnicity, one religion? And suddenly that community, instead of people speaking, let's say, English at places of business, banks, etc., they start speaking a different language to reflect the community that is now there, right? That community change naturally comes with friction. People will naturally be not necessarily fully embracing of a new culture. It'll take time. And people, as a result, may move out of cities, in effect, signaling with their actions what their deep desires are, right? I've met people personally who have told me, without saying that this is xenophobia, but Toronto has changed demographically, ethnically, culturally. and they're moving out of the city. Now, they didn't say those specific words, but they're like, you know what, this is getting kind of wild. I'm moving out of the city. Now, they can couch that in the expensiveness of the city. They can couch that in all types of other, issues that the city is growing quite dramatically. But hidden amongst that is, yes, there is a cultural element that is fundamentally changing in the city of Toronto. There are parts of downtown Toronto that are overrun with international students. And it's not a bad thing, but it brings out people's deep desire for similarity, sameness, the idea that things should be left kind of as they are. So because they can't control that and they're terrified of saying it, they move out of the city. So deep down, what they're saying is that I'm progressive, but I don't really believe deep in my heart progressive values. And that's not a knock. That's not a bad thing. It really isn't. It's just we're people. We have different opinions. We may on the surface say we agree with a bunch of progressive ideas, but deep down, a lot of us don't. And that's just the reality. A perfect example, another perfect example. Last year, here in Canada, there were talks of if a child goes to school and they are gender fluid, as an example. So I'm Christopher at home, but I'm terrified of coming out to my parents that I might be LGBTQ. So what I do is I go to school and I say my name is Christina and I say my pronouns are she, her. Well, that differs from my birthright, what was on my birth certificate. But if I go to my school and I say, that's my pronouns, that's my name, what happened in Canada last year was a lot of schools were saying, we're going to respect Christopher's desire to tell us his pronouns at school, his name at school, and we're not going to tell parents that. We're going to keep that a safe space for Christopher to be his true self. Well, parents groups absolutely were furious at that idea. And again, despite what many parents would say as embracing progressive values, hiding information about their kids, that's where most all parents of every walk on the political spectrum drew the line. And so I think what a lot of interest groups found was that figuring out where people's comfort lies was at the upper echelon of that, upper end of that. People were not comfortable with schools withholding information from parents. Perfect example where on the surface someone says, yes, I'm progressive, but when it comes to my kids, don't you dare hide information from my children. And to be honest, I don't consider that necessarily progressive. I think that's a far extreme take of an otherwise progressive policy of accepting LGBTQ in our society. So again, people on the surface say that they're supportive, but deep down, I don't think most people are. That's just my opinion based on what I've seen and what I've heard in my conversations with people. Another perfect example where I think that progressive values are a facade in many ways are when we see the pro-Palestine encampments. A lot of people, there were websites with faculty from universities saying, I agree with the protesters. But you ask the general public what they think, putting aside the fact that it's a pro-Palestine encampment, a lot of people, if you go through the comments, they'll say, this will solve nothing, you guys are wasting your time, etc. Okay, putting aside that opinion, let's talk about the disclose, divest, and denounce. A lot of people think that that's just impossible to do. Impossible for a host of reasons. And those demands would mean that they disagree with the protesters. While on the surface they agree, yes, we should respect what's happening in the Gaza Strip, they don't agree with the idea of disclose, divest, and denounce. Why? Because it's actually impossible for universities to do. They can disclose investments, they can divest, but that money has to go somewhere else. And if that money goes somewhere else, then what? Are they going to invest in another company that doesn't do damage in the West Bank? Okay, but maybe that company has sweatshops in the Middle East or in India or in Bangladesh. What are we trying to solve here? Thomas Sowell once said, there's no such thing as solutions. There's only trade-offs. And I truly believe that, There are only such things as solutions. There are no such thing as solutions, only trade-offs. But another clear example where people on the surface may say, yeah, I think they've got a point, but deep down when they look at what they're advocating, people just generally don't agree. People on the surface may support abortion, but I don't think most people support abortion at all trimesters, at the third trimester, at late-term abortions. I don't think generally most people agree with that. Again, my assumption. And that comes out. So all of this to say, when Donald Trump comes forward and says things that speak to this in a very clear and concise way, it resonates with people. Because progressive politics, for all its good, dumbs down the conversation. It dumbs it down. It doesn't allow politicians or thoughts or ideas from a broader spectrum. It narrows our focus. It narrows the public square. It narrows how we understand issues. We understand issues through boxes. And what's really terrible about progressive politics, it doesn't allow us to be our true, authentic selves in saying what we truly, truly believe in our hearts. Because progressive politics says that this is the acceptable box and this is the unacceptable box. And if your views are in the unacceptable box, instead of unpacking that, unraveling that, understanding that, it says that you're a xenophobe, a racist, etc. Okay. The last thing I'm going to say about all of this is it's not just Trump derangement syndrome. There's also derangement towards left-leaning politicians and center-left politicians as well. Here in Canada, the amount of F. Trudeau flags that are flown is wild. At rallies, everywhere Trudeau goes today, there's a protest. And it's not a protest that, like, oh, time to change your policies protest. It's vitriolic. People despise this man deeply. They hate Justin Trudeau deeply. And it's because I think of a lot of Trudeau's policies, certainly how he comes across very arrogant, very condescending to people of different opinions, etc. The embodiment of everything I've discussed already. Again, the downside of progressive views is that there is a real inability for us to embrace different opinions. And I think Trudeau embodies that, and people can see through it. But then you couple in inflation, how cost of living is going crazy, COVID and all the lockdowns. People just generally despise the man. Now, is it Trudeau derangement syndrome? I do believe there's an element of that, because I don't think that Pierre Poilievre or any other leader who comes into office will undo a lot of Trudeau's policies. I also think the burden of leadership is real. And there are going to be choices that Poilievre or others will have to make when in office, because it's just the reality of our system and our government structure. And so, as much as I don't like Trudeau, and I would never wave an F Trudeau flag, because I just disagree on his policies and how he's kind of divided Canada, there's an underbelly within Canada and Canadians that really hate Trudeau. And that's not being addressed by Trudeau or by, to an extent, it's being addressed by Poilievre. I think that the challenge for Canadians is getting out of that Trudeau derangement syndrome, and instead petitioning all leaders, Liberal, NDP, Conservative, to put forward more authenticity in their policy. Progressive values are good up to a point, like I said, and then beyond that, again, it narrows the scope. We need to elect leaders of all political stripes who are authentic in their opinion, authentic in how they view things like immigration, abortion, capital punishment. Canada's, I think, the only country in the world with no abortion laws. We don't have capital punishment in this country. We don't have many things that, what we would consider non-progressive countries have. That doesn't mean Canadians don't agree. That doesn't mean Canadians, they don't agree with a lot of those policies. I bet you, I think CTV did a poll once and they found like what 51 or 2% of Canadians support capital punishment. A lot of people don't want to recognize that, but it's real. Canada has a unique problem. Our problem is we're too damn nice. And that niceness, nice guys always finish last, is so, so true because we are denying our true self. We're denying our ability in our politics to put forward names of people who we agree with, who have support for opinions that are just non-conventional, non-popular, but we support them because that's what we think as well, right? Canadians see communities getting a bit too diverse, they move out to cottage country. Instead, they should be saying, hey man, there's a real issue in our cities of not being overrun by immigrants. That's not the point. There's a real issue in our cities because there's a changing demographic, and we have to be able to adapt and build in policies and make sure people who are angry and upset are being heard as well. That's very important because that's a part of our society that we should also acknowledge. Now, I know I've been speaking for a while. The last thing I'm going to say about all of this is a reflection, I think, of what we demand out of our politicians. The dumbing down of our public square is real. It's very real. And when we see politicians who take unconventional opinions, we are quick to dismiss them and quick to write them off, even though deep down, many of us agree with that same politician. Anyways, I'd love to know what you think. Let me know in the comment section below. I think this is a very important conversation that we need to keep having in our society. We need to elect people who are more real and authentic. Let me know what you think in the comment section below.